remember from our first meeting, we were talking about product management being kind of like the intersection of customer, business, technology, and design. But there's like a lot of confusion about what a product manager actually does. So like what your day-to-day operation looks like, how is it different from, let's say, a software engineer to a data scientist to like other roles, right? So on a broader sense, these are like 5 different things that they do on a daily basis, and they work with different teams in terms of like collaboration. So the first thing that they do is they do product analysis. So depending on what your product is, so let's say that you're a product manager for Spotify, you'll be writing down different product requirements for what Spotify is used for, how it can be improved for different kinds of users, stuff like that.
Yeah, so to give you like a real world example of what a product manager does in relation to roles that we're already familiar with, like software engineer or data scientist, which are a lot more common at UMass if we're being honest. So let's take Schmidt for example. He's a product manager. He really cares about building his brand, and he really cares about building the best, most innovative product possible. So this entire group of 4 individuals are part of the Instagram Stories team. So the problem that Schmidt, as the product manager, is hoping to solve is that users want to post content that disappears after 24 hours. So pre-2016, you used to post a picture on Instagram and it would stay there forever unless you wanted to get rid of it. But what if you just wanted to post like a fleeting thought for 24 hours and then have it go away? So that's what Schmidt is trying to present to the higher ups at Instagram and try to make this feature happen. So the first thing that he does is he pitches this to some VP at Instagram Stories. He tells them how important it is, why he thinks it'll put them in a better position in terms of like against Twitter or Facebook, why he thinks it'll make money and things like that.
Yeah, so coming off of that, so so basically, like as a product manager, he took the initiative to like think about this idea and think about this user need, right? So like if I have a thought of like 24 hours, if I want to post something, like he'll be coming up with the initiative. But then after doing that and after figuring out the how and the why, he'll be handing that off, and not handing that off, but like leaving the technical components to like other people. So Smith would do that as a product manager, but as a software engineer, Emily would be figuring out the different APIs and tools needed to build the actual feature and do the actual implementation. So kind of like the how, not the why.
Yeah, so the idea that we want you to grasp from this is that the journey of the product. Oh
Sorry.
no, do you want to grab it? Okay, so the journey of the product starts with the product manager. So the entire idea of Instagram stories or Messenger or notifications on Twitter, whatever it might be, it actually started from a PM. It didn't start from a software engineer, a project manager, a data scientist, or anything else. So that part is really flippin' cool. And then the other part that's really important to understand is the reason why product managers are required to be technical is because, as you can see here, the PM is required to present the how and the why. So they don't need to actually go out and build Instagram stories, but they would need to say like, okay, we would need this many engineers, we would need access to these APIs, this is the data that we already have available, and this is how we can make the product. So a high level understanding of how we can build this is required when you're pitching this to a VP or to an engineer. So you still are involved in like some technical aspect. You're not required to actually sit down and write the code that's going to make the product, but you actually do need to know how to make it. So that's why they say that PMs need to be technical.
And like that plays into like the data scientist role as well. So let's say that Instagram stories, you wanna collect different sorts of analytics, you wanna do like machine learning stuff with that. Then like you wanna know about those architectures as well. So learning more about like the software architecture, you wanna learn how you can improve yourself in like artificial intelligence, machine learning. So like Disha said, you don't need to know how to implement it, but you need to know the overarching architecture of like how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, so going forward to like Sean and Monica, like as a data scientist, Sean's job would be to see, okay, which users are using Instagram stories and how are they using them? Are they using like the stickers more? Are they using it to share other people's content? Are they using it to like do the polls or the questions? Like whatever it is that he finds insights in, it's an iterative process, right? So he would send that insight back to the PM, and then the PM would go, okay, what other features can we come up with? So one of those might be like Instagram coming up with the swipe up links, because they knew that a lot of people were sharing links on Instagram stories. So then there was a PM that would come and go through and figure out how to make swipe up. So that's kind of how people in a team like interact with each other. And I feel like Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about like what a PM does versus any of these other roles? Okay, then we explained it right.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because it can get confusing with like program managers, product managers, like what do they actually do? So like a project manager would focus on the when and the execution, the budget, the program manager would do something else, but the product manager would focus more on the user, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and some of it is like really company dependent. So for example, like a program manager would be more similar to what a project manager does, but Microsoft calls its product managers program managers. So when you see like program manager at Microsoft, that's actually product manager at Microsoft, but they just call it something different. So it can be really company dependent, but for the overall technology industry, like this is the basic standard. All right, let's
Awesome.
to the next slide.
So what does a PM career path looks like? So we all know what a software engineer or a data scientist, what their path looks like for the most part. At least that's what I was familiar with in my undergraduate years. But what does a product manager do, and like what does their career path look like? So this is kind of like a small trajectory. So you
It's not small.
okay, it's kind of like a big trajectory. So you start with like a product management internship, then you get like a new grad PM role, and then kind of like similar to what you would do as a software engineer, you would become like a product manager 2, 3, become like a senior product manager, become a director, and then go on to become CEO.
Yeah, so maybe like 5 to 7 years ago, there was no path for a student to go directly from their undergrad or their grad, like directly from college to becoming a product manager. The general norm was you become a software engineer, you do software engineering for a while, maybe you become an engineering manager, and then the software engineers that were highly creative or highly collaborative, they would go on to becoming product managers. And then a couple years ago, people realized that we can hire college grads to do product management roles the same way that we hired college grads to do software engineering and data scientist roles. So if you go to see like UMass alumni right now, all of the UMass alumni, they have like untraditional paths to PM, like maybe they were a consultant or they were a software engineer, and then they became a PM, so it can be kind of hard to map like what the PM journey looks like. But now that there are so many APM programs and there's so many students who right after college are becoming product managers, this is what their general career path is going to look like. And did you know that the CEO of LinkedIn, Google, and Microsoft all used to be product managers before they became CEOs?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's pretty freaking cool. They were definitely like really, really cool people if they became CEOs.
Yeah. And so like kind of like going into like the different categories of like product management in different companies. So it depends on your interest, right? So let's say that you're really into design, and you are really fascinated by, let's say, Figma, InVision, or like Apple, or like some other company like that, then your role as a PM would focus more on that. Versus if you're at an engineering focused company like Google, or if you're at a fintech company like Robinhood or PayPal, your day-to-day job would look different versus if you were at like a data science company versus a different kind of a company.
Yeah, so for example, like at Tableau, maybe there's a product manager who's in charge of all of the different graphs. Or at Twitter, you're in charge of notifications. Or on Facebook, there's PM on groups. Or for Microsoft Teams, I saw on TikTok the other day, if anyone's seen like the TikToks that people have on the Microsoft Teams calling sound, and they're like, the sound like traumatizes me. And it was one of the PMs on Microsoft Teams responding saying, I'm literally in charge of the sound. This is so sad. So there's actually people who are in charge of every single minute detail, and those are usually PMs.
So it kind of like depends on like what your strengths lie in. So let's say that you're really passionate about like fintech, right? And you want to know more about like payments, processing, stuff like that. Then you would probably want to work as a PM at like Goldman Sachs, Robinhood, PayPal, because they deal with that on a day-to-day basis. And like as a PM, you're more than likely to encounter that. So like problems related to that. But if you're more interested in like a B2B facing business, and like Microsoft, Salesforce, those are the companies that target those particular industries.
Okay, so as we mentioned earlier, there's not that many PMs at UMass. Usually people go for more traditional software engineering routes, or lately data science has become really popular. So I feel like one myth that I've heard, or like, have you heard too?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Is that like PMs, they don't earn as much money as software engineers do, or they don't live the same life, or they don't have the same career path, or something like that. But that is a myth. So does anyone want to guess like what the salary range for a new grad PM is like? Feel free to just shout it out. What do you think it is between X and Y?
100K.
100K to what?
Oh, I said 90 to 110.
90 to 110. Okay. Anyone else? Just give me your best guess. Ayush, what do you think?
I'd say like maybe 100 to 115K.
Okay. Emily, what about you?
I was gonna say lower. I was gonna say like 80 to 100.
80 to 100. Okay. What about Meghna? You guys, what are you guys thinking?
100 to 120.
Okay.
Is this an average or just like the highest and lowest?
Whatever you think average it could be.
Is it starting?
Starting, yes. Starting salary for a new grad PM.
Doesn't it like differ significantly based where you're at? Like couldn't an upper level or a higher tier company like give 180K while more of a normal company would give like 80K?
Okay. Cool. Manas, what do you think?
I think around 80 for startup size, but
Okay.
if you go on to bigger tech companies, it's gonna be like 90.
Okay, let's find out. Okay, so at Google, it's 167. At Facebook, it's 166. Salesforce is 191. LinkedIn is 200. And these are a few more companies. So Microsoft is around 168. Roblox is 359 if you're really smart and you negotiate really well. And it looks like if you're at a startup, you're somewhere near 100K, and then it just keeps going up.
Yeah, and so like these salaries are like base compensation plus like stocks, bonuses, stuff like that. So like it amounts to like a whole lot of amount. And like these are new grad salaries, right? So like 3 or 4 years ago, like Disha was talking about, like you'd probably be like a software engineer, do an MBA, and like these PM internships and like PM positions were coveted for like MBA students. But now the trend is changing, right? So like as a new grad, you'd probably be making around this much compared to like other positions as well.
So the goal of showing you these numbers is to show that PM is a comparable career to software engineering or data science. There's no stacked ranking, there's no difference in salary compensation. You will still live a wonderful life regardless of either of those 3 career paths. I feel like it's a really foreign career at our college, so that's why I think it's helpful to share these numbers. Okay, you want to take it away?
Yeah. The next question is, let's say like you're all said you wanna get like a PM internship at like a big company. Your first step would be making up a resume. So now all of us know how to make a resume, like probably like for more of a software engineer type role. But like a PM resume would be different in terms of like what your impacts are, how you're like highlighting your projects, how you're highlighting your technical skills. So like an example would be that you don't really want to mention like all of the skills that you use. So let's say that if you're using like Python, JavaScript, stuff like that. PM positions don't really care about that. They care about like how you use that tool to make an impact. So that's like a really important thing to keep in mind when you're designing your resume. Like it's really different from like a software engineer or data scientist resume because you're focusing more on like technical projects. But over here, you're like as a PM, you would be focusing more on like your leadership abilities and how you contributed towards like the campus or like even in a different organization, how you talk to the customer and came up with different requirements. So that's more important when people are looking for like PM roles.
So another thing to note here, if you're applying this for next summer to software engineering roles and to PM roles, make sure you're applying with 2 different resumes. So you shouldn't have one resume that you're submitting to PM roles and that you're submitting to SWE roles. Because depending on how you structured your resume, you might not get either, or you'll get like software engineering if you haven't tailored it to PM. So make sure that you have separate resumes when you're applying to each of those positions. But like Dhruv said, on that resume, make sure you highlight technical skills, because like we talked about, PMs do need to know how to make things. Make sure you list any leadership roles, and make sure you list impact. So not like you use Python, Java, but how many people use the website that you made? Or if you were improving something, by how much percentage did you improve it? Anything like that that you can show impact of.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's important for PM resume is kind of like showing people that you're more like a company, not a founder, but like you're more entrepreneurship driven, because that's what being a product manager is. It's kind of like being like the mini CEO of a product. So like if you're more entrepreneurship driven, like that really goes a long way. So like coming to this, these are some of the things that Disha was talking about. So like kind of like making an impact, right? So highlighting these words. So if you're
Don't actually highlight them on your resume. These are just like, for example, I've seen that on other resumes. Don't actually highlight them.
So one thing that that's going on over here is if you look at the first bullet point, right? It's built internal access, portal in React, like the rest of the stuff, and like saving 10 hours per week. So that's like an impact that's like quantifiable, right? So if I'm a recruiter, if and I'm looking at this resume and I have no idea what React means. I know that she saved like 10 hours per week, but that's more relatable to the recruiter than like some other like technological tool.
Yeah, just try to show like, as you can see, we mentioned React, we mentioned Splunk, we mentioned Java, but at the same time, we said, okay, we remediated 20 plus inconsistencies. It was over 3 months, we saved 10 hours per week, and we built a tool for 12 suites. So showing that kind of impact along with whatever it is that you worked on is what's really important as a PM. And then same for the second part. So for Hacker, that's kind of an example of getting leadership experience, which you'll need as a product manager. So like being a part of PM Club is great, but next semester, try to apply for e-board positions or whatever other clubs you might be a part of, like Build or Hacker, Hack UMass, Cybersecurity Club. Try to get involved with their e-boards because that's what will show off on the resume rather than just being a member.
Yeah, and one thing I'd say is that don't be afraid to like mention like these kinds of amounts, like funding by let's say 68,000 or like any dollar amount, because like that really goes to show that you put in the work, you got like outside funding. If you did something as part of like your internship or any other work that had like something related to that, like mention those amounts and mention those figures, because like the more recruiters see those figures, the more likely they are to actually select you.
Anyone have any questions about PM resumes? Cool. Okay, so now that we talked about resumes, let's talk about interviewing. So a regular suite interview, how many people have given like coding interviews? Raise your hand. Okay, how many people have done like PM interviews? Okay, cool. So the general breakdown of PM interviews is a lot different from suite interviews. There's definitely like a technical component where you might be asked to explain a specific algorithm or ask like the difference between a few programming languages or even to do a coding question. But the bulk of the interview is different types of product related questions. So you can kind of see a rough breakdown here. I don't know how accurate the percentages are, but strategy, design, analysis, and behavioral are the bulk of PM interviews. So we'll get into like what examples of those questions is like.
So going on to the different types of questions. So the first is product design. So over here, when you're asked this question, it's not expected for you to write anything down. It's more about like talking through what your thought process is and like coming up with different solutions based on like different user pain points. And same with product strategy, estimation, behavioral. Like for technical, like Disha said, that you might be able to like maybe not you might not get asked like technical coding questions, but you might be asked like technical conceptual questions like explain the concept of recursion to my grandma. So like if you know what recursion is and you've probably done it 100 times, like that's fine, but like how would you explain that to someone who doesn't know what recursion is? Or how would you explain like cloud to a 5-year-old child? So stuff like that, like it's not to trip you up, but it's basically to know what your concept about like object-oriented programming or like software design generally is.
Yeah, and like we mentioned earlier, PMs have to work with people in legal or in sales or in other groups that they don't know what recursion might be or they don't care what recursion might be. So you need to be able to explain it in a way that you know and you have an understanding of the audience that you're speaking to and you're able to translate technical things. So let's say for the product design question, how would you improve Google Maps? The general format for a question like that, you would first pause and say, okay, are we improving Google Maps for a specific type of user, like someone who's visually impaired or for someone who has audio disabilities, or are we improving it for a specific country? Or are we improving it for a specific, like for desktop, for mobile, something like that? Once you've narrowed it down, then you would ask like, okay, give me a few minutes, let me come up with some ways that we can improve it for the US specifically. Let's say that's the answer your interviewer gave you. So in this case, you would come prepared with 3 big ideas to the interview. One of them might be, what were some of the big ideas that you used?
For Google Maps, so let's say that Google Maps might not be totally accessible, so having like an accessible option that there's like crowdsourcing ability, so first thing that could be an option. The second thing would be like if you want to like stop somewhere, like kind of like do like having a good ecosystem with other apps. So let's say that if you want to like go on a trip or like have a road trip, then you want to have like that seamless transition.
Okay, so the 3 big ideas you said were accessibility, like integrations with other apps, and then using like the sharing economy, like using data from others. So you would come prepared with those 3 big ideas, and then you would pull features from those ideas that you've come up with, and then you would pitch that to your interviewer and tell them why you think these are the best ideas.
Yeah, I think the trick with these kinds of questions is to narrow down the question into like what you want to do. So like what Disha was talking about, if it's for a specific country, if it's for a specific state, if it's for a specific user group. So let's say that this could be Google Maps for just for like college students, right? So the need for college students would be completely different from the needs of like a 50-year-old person. Like how would you make features to improve the experience of a college student? So then you get to like designing features and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the same for the last question, the data analysis one. What are the things Netflix should measure every day? There's actually an acronym to answer data questions. It's called GAME. The first G stands for goals. So you would outline the overall goals of Netflix. Then you would talk about the actions that the users need to take in order for Netflix to be able to meet those goals. So let's say one goal of Netflix is to promote themselves during the holiday season. So that every time you want to watch a Christmas movie, you're going straight to Netflix. You're not going to Hulu or anything else. So some of the actions that the users might have to take is they need to be able to see Christmas movies right when they log on. They need to be able to get notifications or whatever it might be. And then M would be metrics. So for notifications, what metrics should we look at? Should we see what time of the day do people generally click on our notification? Should we see between age groups who's more likely to see a specific notification for a 90s movie versus a 2000s movie? And then E would be evaluate. You would go back and evaluate all of the decisions that you just made. So these questions sound really gigantic and overarching, but there's actually frameworks that you can use to break them down and then deliver the best answer that you can.
Yeah, like for example, like what's the market size for driverless cars in 2025? Like we have no idea. Like what does the market look like in the next 4 years? But like how you can like break it down into from like a top-down approach. Okay, so like these are the amount of cars that exist right now. These are the amount of possibilities, stuff like that. So the ways in which you can tackle them, like the frameworks make it really easy to do that.
Yeah, so that's kind of like what they want to see. Like the question for estimation, it's like, let's say that PM on Instagram stories, when he pitched to his VP, he had to explain what the market size for people on Instagram who want posts to disappear in 24 hours might look like. There's no way he actually knows like an exact estimate, but he has to break it down. So these are the types of skills that they want to see you can do. So let's do a little bit of practice. Okay, how would you bring influencers on Twitter? Does anyone have an answer? You can just shout out random brain ideas. Kyle, what do you think?
I would make, this is what I've done the last week, I would make good-looking graphics that
Oh, I saw those.
simply explain a tantalizing idea.
So you build tools for them to make graphics? You're a PM at Twitter, so how would you bring influencers on Twitter?
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing to do. Make a simple graphic editing tool that's right in the app. So you can come up with an idea and make something nice looking.
Anyone else have any ideas?
Yeah. Sorry?
I was asking if you're like, does it just like to get them to use it? Like, how do you bring them on?
Yeah, so let's say that you want to increase like user engagement at Twitter, and like one way you want to do that is to bring on more influencers so that you can increase like user engagement, kind of like what TikTok or like Instagram does.
How would you get influencers to get on Twitter?
Yeah.
So one of the things that influencers need to be able to do is to understand their audiences. So perhaps by building competitive analysis tools for influencers, like that could be YouTube's or Instagram's analysis tools, that could be something that's appealing to them, and that would bring them onto Twitter.
That's a really good answer. I feel like you'd get the job.
Kind of like having a creator fund probably for Twitter, where you get like influencers to make some money if they make good content probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like the tip jar that they
It's
just
kind
came
of
out
like the
with.
TikTok creator fund, but then you have it for Twitter, I guess.
They actually just did that for Spaces.
Ah. Anyone else? Should we call people randomly?
Yeah.
Oh, influencers often affiliate market or have brand deals, and it would be more seamless to get more of their followers to buy products if they have to go to a different app after clicking the link to whatever product they're selling, and they could make the purchase within Twitter.
Oh, that makes sense. So like if you follow like someone on Twitter, like you can just like use that medium to basically see what they're buying and like buy the same thing.
A lot of influencers will follow other influencers, so if you offer like an incentive for like a few big influencers
you were a VC, would you be more bullish on crypto or VR? Crypto is like Bitcoin, and then VR is like Oculus Sense.
Yes, so if you were part of a venture capitalist firm and if you had to like basically get more funding on like either crypto or VR, so let's say that you see Facebook, you see other companies and they're like investing more in these kind of like categories, but they're like for the future, so you don't really know, so what would you be doing?
I've actually been asked this question before, so it's a legit question you could get. Does anyone know? What would you go with?
I think I'd be more bullish on VR due to crypto seeming to have the possibility of governments just quashing it. And also we've seen that in China, they want to have very strong control over their currency, and they're one of the largest markets and they influence most of Asia. And then for VR, we see that it's increasingly used in manufacturing, design, and in the medical space. And those are all very high value spaces. And with more automation, VR seems to be a tool that would be very useful for making other tasks easier to do for just one person.
I like that answer. I like how you brought in other countries too and tried it in as a global thing. Anyone else? This was kind of a tough question.
You have to
Okay.
show hands.
Why do you think Microsoft bought LinkedIn?
They probably realized that since they already have like platforms like Teams and stuff like that that like are used in a professional workspace, by buying LinkedIn they might like increase, I guess, like a new audience for like people who use LinkedIn are already on there for like a professional reason, so they might use Microsoft for the same like reason. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Can you pull your mask up your nose, please? There's so many reasons. There's no one else. I think another one was Salesforce was really after it, and that's like one of their biggest competitors. So if Salesforce had all of the data that LinkedIn had, then that would be a big struggle for Microsoft.
Yeah.
LinkedIn was kind of the first of its kind, I feel like, so
Yeah.
for them to own kind of the original innovation, they have a lot of growth that they can use, and they have more resources to be able to
Yeah,
make
and-
things like really happen.
Yeah, I feel like Microsoft kind of owns like all the like professional stuff, so LinkedIn kind of fit their brand. Anyone want to take a guess at this one? People have actually been asked this question.
Yeah. What would your general approach be? So you don't have to give like an answer. Like no one really cares what the actual number is. But like what would you start with? What would be your first step in answering this? Yeah.
Old white males in America. Like the number of old, like, are, give me a second, I need a second.
Is this question basically for me?
It's for you?
No, is this question basically a Fermi question?
What's a Fermi question?
Like, they're like styles of questions where you have to answer in magnitudes, like, famous one is how many bathtubs worth of volume are in the sun, or something like that.
Yeah, so the question is like more about how you get to the answer, but the actual answer you give doesn't matter at all.
So I guess you'd start with, so US, so population as a whole, so that's 324 million about, and then trends for golfing increased during the pandemic as people were looking for activities to do outside, and also hasn't gone down that much. So if it was originally mostly old white people, it's kind of expanded from that, and it's probably more adults than children. And I don't know what the demographics for percentage of like children to adults is in the US, but let's say 40% children, 60% adults.
That's a lot of children.
Okay, 70?
It could be, I don't
Yeah.
know.
70-30.
70-30, so 70%, and then if you were to say skews more towards male than female, let's say 40%, 30% of males and 20% of females, so then that's for 70 that goes down to 35, 15, so let's say around 30%. And then how often do people golf and use golf holes? I have no clue about that.
You could say like, let's say once a week On
one-
weekends.
So on weekends, 30% of the yeah, 30, yeah, that seems excessively high.
Yeah, so that's like the exact breakdown that they would want you to go through, so I would say you get the job too. That was good.
Yeah.
I just have a question, so they're not looking for an actual number, if you were to give like a percentage of the US, and then say like that would be advertised, would that be a successful answer, or are they looking for like a genuine number?
So there are like two kinds of approaches. So like one's like the top-down approach, which you were talking about, kind of like breaking down like the entire population, like 300 million, then like going down from there. So kind of like these are the number of like golf like events that are happening. Like these are the golf institutions, and like breaking it down from that point. And the second approach is kind of like the bottom-up approach, kind of like speaking from your experience. So like I know from like my experience that like there are like 10 golf institutions like around me. Like on a weekly basis, they have like these many golf balls. So, like using that estimation for like maybe like this one state and then using that for other states. That's kind of like the other approach. But it's kind of like similar. You can use either one.
So you wouldn't need to give them an exact.
No,
No.
you wouldn't need to. So at the end, you should have an exact number that you give them, but it doesn't have to be accurate. So I would say like before you have a PM interview and you know they're gonna ask you estimation questions, Cracking the PM Interview and Decode and Conquer are the two best books. They actually have like exact, like how I gave the game framework, they have exact frameworks on how to break down these questions.
Yeah.
Also, you can consider the fact that how many golf balls are lost by taking a survey or in and around your area. Not only the requirement, but also how many golf balls are lost, so that you can figure out the whole market size of the golf ball.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's something like you can take into account. Like if you say stuff like that, like if we take into account like lost balls,
Like
stuff
edge
like
cases.
yeah, edge cases, like that would be really good because that's the one thing that interviewers look for. Like apart from like the general framework, like what are some of the things that you can think of like outside of that? That'd be really nice.
Yeah, but I would also like take into account like if it's a 30-minute interview, like don't spend too much time on edge cases and stuff. If they're asking you for the market size of golf balls, just give them like your general, you know, your breakdown and your thought process, because that's more important than the actual number itself. Okay,
Yeah.
What was the second book you said after cracking?
Decode and Conquer.
Decode.
but like the most recent edition, there's 3 editions. So yeah, most recent edition. Okay, we don't have to answer this question, but here's another example. So like, what is the storage space? Bye, Manas. Good luck for the exam. What is the storage space required to host all images on Google Street View? Or walk us through how you would design an alarm clock product for a blind user.
This is actually a very common question. But yeah, like, stuff to keep in mind. This is like more of a design question. Like they're like the framework that Disha talked about. Like you can also like kind of like work around that.
Similar to how we talked about the like improve Google Maps question, similar framework. Or what is the required internet bandwidth for an average college campus? How would you improve coffee machines used in offices? All right. Anyone have any questions about interviews and interview questions? Okay, hopefully that didn't stress anyone out.
Yeah. Yeah, apart from like those kinds of questions, there are like other questions that basically like ask you about like network architecture, like not really like coding questions, but like stuff that we talked about, like recursion, like explain recursion, like maybe like I was asked in an interview once, what happens when you load up like facebook.com. So it's more of like a network question where you talk about like, oh, you go to the front end, you go to the back end, collect data, stuff like that.
Yeah, or like a systems design question, something like that. If anyone has upcoming PM interviews, feel free to let one of us know. We always do like mock interviews, so if you need that help, we're always here to help. So we won't get into this slide or this one, but we'll put the link to these slides in the PM Club Slack. If you're not in it, come up to us afterwards and like one of the e-board members can help you. But these are a list of ways that you can start getting experience so that you can start applying to PM internships. So you'll need experience in like the product space before you can start applying to internships. So the ways that you can do it is through Build. I know a ton of you became business developers for Build, so that's the first step, which is awesome. And a bunch of other ones that we'll just leave on here for you to go and see. And then these are some first and second year internships for product management. So if you're a freshman or sophomore, definitely look at this too. Okay, any questions?
Yeah.
So, when you guys were talking about like the 20-year plan or whatever, so if I, let's say, become a senior PM, am I monitoring more PMs under me, or am I monitoring more like features or products under me? How does that work?
So it depends on the company, but what would happen is you primarily primarily be responsible for a couple of different products. So let's say that as a product manager, you'd be responsible for like a small feature, but like as a senior product manager, you'd be responsible for like 2 or 3 big features. So let's say that as a product manager, you're responsible for Instagram stories, but as a senior product manager, you're responsible for like everything related to that, like when you swipe left, like what happens when you have stories, reels, stuff like that. That would kind of like be the overarching like responsibility, that you would have like PMs under you, but you'd also be responsible for different kinds of like features.
Gotcha.
Okay, so last summer, I was a PM intern on Azure Security, right? So I was right here. So one of my coworkers had just joined last year, so he was right here. He was a PM1, and then I was a PM intern. And then we had 2 other PMs that we worked with, so that was this and this. And then we had a senior, we didn't have a senior on our team, but we had a principal and lead product manager. So the lead product manager wasn't our manager, but she was kind of like the anchor of the team that like the newer people would go to if they had questions. But my manager, the new grad, all 3 of these people were all managed by the principal PM manager. And then the principal PM manager was managed by the group product manager, who managed multiple PM managers. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And then the director manages multiple group product managers. And then the director is managed by the VP. So that's like kind of the breakdown. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, like CPO is kind of like a new position. Like I would say like 10 years ago, like not a lot of companies had CPOs. Like not a lot of companies, like the smaller companies, they probably don't. But it's kind of like more product focused. So like if you're, let's say, working at Asana or like working at Figma, they're really product focused and product driven. So like it's kind of like a new position that a lot of companies are coming up with.
Like, did anyone hear of Robinhood? They just hired a new CPO, and she was like a really high up product manager at YouTube. That was the coolest thing ever. Or I think LinkedIn has a CPO as well. There's a ton of different companies. Any other questions? Yeah.
I know you can go from software engineer to product manager, but could you go from product manager to software
Wait,
engineer?
talk louder.
Oh, I know you can go from software engineer to product manager, but could you go from product manager to software engineer?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can like switch between positions. Like it depends on how technical you are. So let's say that you've been working as a PM and you've been working highly in like this like particular feature that uses like data science or like software engineer, or like some sort of like scalable system, and you know like different technologies that work with that. Yeah, you can absolutely transition.
It's very unlikely because usually people who are PMs, like in the traditional space, they would be SWEs and then they become PMs. So those are usually like the more creative software engineers who wanted to be more on the design and customer side. But yeah, it's definitely possible. You can also be like a more technical PM. Like there's one CICS alumni. He's a PM on Series. So he works on Series AI/ML, and he has to be super technical for that. So he got his master's in computer science and stuff like that. So while he's a PM, he's still working with like more coding and more technical stuff.
Yeah, and like as in some companies, what you'll be doing as a TPM, so let's say a TPM at Facebook, you're a technical program manager, but you're also like coding on the side as well.
Yeah.
So you're technically a product manager or a program manager. You're also doing like some sort of the responsibilities of what a software engineer does, so it's like easier to transition from that.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
So since there's no major as product manager, I believe most of us are on-site majors. So while choosing the electives, like after you're done with the core courses, so while you're choosing your elective courses, would it be more beneficial to target a specific domain of CS, or gain a diverse experience by taking different type of courses?
I would say
You
like,
should look at this list.
yeah, so like firstly you can like look at this list. So like CS 529, that's like a really good course because you're basically the manager of like 10 software engineers. So like I've taken that course, I took it last year, and it's like really nice because you get to actually be their manager, and you get to like kind of like drive the product from scratch to kind of like deployment. That's like one thing that you can do to kind of like, yeah.
I'm also taking CS 529 now, and one thing I mentioned is that it's not very product oriented, so you don't get to pick the product at all. It is very people oriented though, so that's something to keep in mind.
You could try 325. That class is pretty cool. It's like you make a website from scratch, and you get to make like the Figma wireframes, and you get to make the product decisions on what features there should be, what tasks should the users have, things like that. At other colleges where product management, they're like PM feeder schools, like Cornell, Stanford, Yale, they have literal product management 101 classes. Like how we have 121 for Java, they have 121 for product management. So hopefully one day in the future, UMass will have something like that. But in the meantime, these are really great courses too.
Yeah, I'd recommend that apart from like comp-sci courses, one thing that you can also do is kind of explore other domains like economics. Like econ courses are really good because they're really tied in with like different kinds of like big data questions, stuff like that. Like one of the courses is that. So maybe like exploring something like that would be good.
Thank you.
Alright, so, like, I know you're saying, like, to get other, like, major experiences, so if, like, in Eisenberg, I don't know if you're familiar with the majors, but would you happen to know which Eisenberg major would be the best complement?
So that would be OIM. So if you look at operations and information management, I'd say that I know a couple of alumni who were OIM majors and now they're product managers. So I would say that's the easiest transition to becoming a product manager, not only in terms of like getting a job, but also in terms of skills. So in terms of like learning different technologies, learning different skills, like, but also soft skills. I think they do a really good job of that.
Yeah, so the path to becoming a product manager, it's definitely computer science and informatics are like the best majors you could do. And then after that, it would be like OIM. After that, maybe like economics. Or OIM and econ might be at the same. You could do like a BDIC, like Kyle's doing BDIC design. You could do a couple of different variations, but like what major are you right now?
So I think that I was debating, I'm CS and then I'm also in Eisenberg and I have to choose my major, so I was debating between marketing and OIM and I wasn't sure which one, but I think I'm leaning toward OIM.
I think OIM would be a good bet because you get some of like the hard skills that you need as a PM or even for like any role, and you can always take like marketing electives and stuff like that. But that's a really good combination. Any other questions before we play Kahoot? Alright, let's go. Alright, so we're gonna test your knowledge on, and the winner gets $5